My son's fiancée waited until the apple pie was on the table to tell me she needed $850,000, and she said it the way most people ask you to pass the salt. Soft voice, easy smile, like the number was already mine to give, and she was just doing me the courtesy of letting me know where it should go. I set down my fork, and before I could say a word, my boy slid a folded napkin across my knee under the table, and on it, in pen pressed so hard it nearly tore through, were 6 words that turned my Sunday upside down. I'll tell you what I said back to her. 2 words. It took her smile clean off her face. But before I get into it, do me a favor and tell me in the comments what time it is, where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever watched somebody try to rob a person you love right in front of you and smile while they did it. My name is Warren Tillman. I'm 67 years old, and for 28 of those years I was a special agent with IRS Criminal Investigation, working out of the Cincinnati field office before they moved me up to Columbus. People hear IRS and picture a clerk with a green visor adding up receipts. That's not the job. The job was following money the way a tracker follows blood in the snow. Through shell companies, through cooked books, through men in good suits who looted pension funds and bought boats with the proceeds. I put 51 people in federal prison over my career. I retired 4 years ago, after my knees gave out and my doctor gave me a speech, and I told myself I was done with all of it. I'd restore my old mantel clocks. I'd fish the reservoir in the mornings. I'd be a quiet old man in a quiet brick house in Worthington. I lost my wife, Eleanor, 9 years ago, pancreatic. It took her in 4 months, and after that the house got so loud with silence that I think I leaned on the work harder than was healthy. So when my son, Caleb, started bringing a woman around last spring, and that woman put a light back in his eyes I hadn't seen since college, I'll be honest with you, I wanted it to be real so badly that I stopped looking. A man who spent 3 decades distrusting everybody for a living decided just this once to trust. That decision nearly cost my son everything. Caleb is 34. He writes software for a logistics company, makes good money, and he's the gentlest soul you'll ever meet, which in this world is the same as wearing a sign that says easy. His mother's kindness, none of my suspicion. He met her. I'll call her what she was to me, my son's fiancée, at a wine-tasting fundraiser downtown. She told him she ran an interior design firm. She had the look of money, posture like she'd been raised in a debutante hall, a handbag that probably cost more than my truck, a way of touching your forearm when she laughed. That made you feel chosen. Her brother came around too, a slick fellow who called himself a private wealth advisor and wore cufflinks to a backyard cookout. I should have clocked that. Nobody comfortable with their own money wears cufflinks to grill birders. That Sunday, I'd cooked, pot roast, the way Eleanor used to. Caleb had been off all afternoon, kept refilling water glasses, no body emptied, kept checking his phone and then flinching like it had bitten him. I figured it was the engagement. They'd gotten the ring 4 weeks before, and I figured he was nervous about the wedding talk I knew was coming. Oh, it came. She brought a leather folder to dinner, set it beside her plate like a closing attorney. When the pie was down, she opened it, and out came glossy printouts, a lakeside venue near Hocking Hills, a designer gown, a guest list of 300. And then a second set of pages, and that's where my stomach turned, because the second set wasn't a wedding. It was a future plan, a down payment on a lake house, seed capital for an expansion of her firm. And at the bottom, a tidy total she read out loud without one flicker of embarrassment, $850,000. We figured it made the most sense to bundle it, she said, smiling at me. Caleb said you've been so generous already and family helps family. This way it's one clean conversation instead of 100 awkward little ones. I want you to notice something I noticed right then, because the folks in the comments on these stories always catch it, and they're right to. In any normal world, when there's a wedding, the conversation about who pays is a conversation between 2 families, both at the table. Her people weren't there. Her brother wasn't there. Nobody on her side was being asked to put in a dime. The whole 850,000 was pointed at one man, me, and dressed up as family. That right there was the first thing that didn't add up. Real families negotiate. Cons just present you the invoice. That's a specific number, I said, keeping my voice as flat as the pie tin. It breaks down beautifully, she said, and she walked me through it. The venue, the florals flown in for the season, a gown by a designer I won't name because the woman doesn't deserve the publicity. Her brother handled the investment side, she said, and he'd set up an account ready to receive the funds so everything would be tax efficient. She actually used those words to a retired IRS agent. Tax efficient. I almost laughed. And under the table, while she talked, my boy's hand found my knee with the napkin. I'm 67 and my hands aren't what they were, but I spent a career watching men pass folded paper across courtroom tables, and I know how to take something without anyone seeing me take it. I palmed it, kept my eyes on her, nodded along about cherry blossoms and string quartets while my thumb worked the napkin open against my thigh and read the dents Caleb had carved into it. Dad, she's draining my accounts. She's a fraud. Help. I'll tell you, there's a particular cold that goes through you when your child asks for help in a way they're trying to hide. It went all the way down. But I'd spent 28 years learning that the worst thing you can do, the very worst, is let them see you've understood. The second a con knows you've made them, the game changes and they start covering tracks. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done at a dinner table. I smiled at the woman robbing my son and I said, I see. Then I looked her dead in the eye and I said the two words, show me. She blinked. I'm sorry? Show me, I said again. Show me the signed contracts, the venue deposit agreement, the vendor invoices with real company names and tax IDs, the paperwork on this design firm I'm being asked to capitalize. You've got a folder full of pictures. Pictures aren't proof. I'd been asked for $850,000 at my own dinner table. And before I move a number that size, I'm going to do what I'd do for any deal of any kind. I'm going to see the documents. The temperature in that dining room dropped about 10 degrees. The brother, who'd been quiet, jumped in smooth as oil. Warn with respect, that's not really how high-end planning works. These are relationship-based vendors. The contracts come after the deposit. Then I guess I'll meet the relationships, I said. Set up a sit-down with the planner and the firm. I want to shake hands. I want to read paper. You give me 72 hours to put it together, and I'll give you my decision. I let my voice go warm, almost apologetic. It's just due diligence. At my age, you stop apologizing for it. My son's fiancée recovered fast. I'll give her that. She was a professional. And she laughed and said, of course, that she loved that I was so careful that it just showed how much I cared about Caleb. But I saw it. The thing behind the eyes. The same thing I used to see across an interview table the moment a suspect realized a friendly accountant across from them had already pulled their bank records. It's not fear exactly. It's recalculation. I got my coat, told Caleb I needed his help carrying something to my truck, and walked him out into the cold October dark. The minute the door shut, he came apart. 34 years old, shaking on my driveway like the day he wrecked his bike on the gravel hill behind our old house. How long? I said. 8 months. He couldn't look at me. It started small. Her car needed repairs. Then her mom, she said her mom had medical bills. Then the firm needed a bridge loan for a project, and she'd pay it back in 30 days. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. Dad, it's almost 40 grand. And every time I'd say something, she'd cry, and then she'd remind me how her last boyfriend didn't trust her either, and I'd end up apologizing. I started recording our conversations because I don't even know why. Because something in me kept saying, write it down, save it, you're going to need it. I put my hand on the back of my son's neck, the way I used to when he was small. You did the right thing tonight, I told him. Slipping me that note was the smartest thing you've done in 8 months. Now you're going to go home. You're going to act normal, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" He nodded. "Good," I said, "because she picked the wrong family, and she's about to find out she picked the wrong father." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with a pot of coffee, and I did what I know how to do. The 72 hours I'd given her wasn't a courtesy. It was a clock. Either she'd produce real documents, which she couldn't, or she'd panic and fabricate, and fabrication is where people like her always leave fingerprints. First thing in the morning, I called a man named Sal Ferraro, a private investigator I'd worked alongside on a couple of joint cases back in the day. Sal's the kind of guy who can find out what you had for breakfast in 1994. I told him I needed deep background on my son's fiancée and her brother. Financials, prior relationships, property, the works. Sal whistled when I told him the number she'd asked for. $850? That's not a girlfriend, Warren, that's a business plan. I told him that was exactly what I was afraid of, and to start digging. Then I called Priya Nair, a forensic accountant who used to do contract work for the Bureau. I needed somebody to take whatever Sal pulled and turn it into something clean enough to put in front of a federal prosecutor. And I called a lawyer named Dale Whitman, sharp as a tack, who handled financial fraud on the civil and criminal side both. I testified in 2 of his cases. He picked up on the second ring, and I told him I might have a live one. While my people went to work, the woman went to work too. The very next morning, Caleb got a text. "Still waiting on your dad's apology. This is our future he's disrespecting." 2 days later, her brother emailed me a preliminary agreement, 19 pages, vendor names, line items, the whole thing totaling a hair over $860,000. It looked sharp. Letterhead, logos, signature blocks. To a normal mark, it would have looked airtight. I forwarded it to Priya. 4 hours later, she called me back, and I could hear the grin in her voice. "Warren, 8 of these vendors don't exist. No registration, no EIN, nothing. The 4 that are real businesses, I called them as a prospective client checking references. Not one of them has ever heard of her or her firm, and the design firm she wants you to capitalize. The LLC was registered 11 days ago." 11 days. There's no firm. There's a name on a state website. 11 days. She'd build her future plan the week after she got the ring. Sal's first report came on day 5, and it was worse than I'd let myself imagine. My son's fiancée had been engaged 3 times in the previous 6 years. Cleveland, Indianapolis, Louisville. Every single engagement had ended 2 to 3 weeks before the wedding date. Every single time a man with money had handed over a large sum toward a wedding or a joint investment managed by her brother. And every single time the money went into accounts that scattered into shell companies and vanished. A man in Cleveland named Doug Hartley lost $290,000. A man in Indianapolis, Vincent Pruitt, lost $310,000. And a man in Louisville named Wade. Wade had actually hired a lawyer, started pulling threads, and they skipped town inside of a week. The brother wasn't a wealth advisor. He'd never held a license in his life. He was the bank. He was where the money went to disappear. I sat with that report a long time. Somewhere across town, the 2 of them were probably toasting how well the dinner had gone, certain they'd either get the money or move on to the next city. They had no idea that the bewildered, agreeable old dad they'd sized up over pot roast had stopped existing the moment my son's hand touched my knee. I want to be careful here, because the temptation when you've been wronged is to go in swinging. I'd watched amateurs blow airtight cases by tipping their hand too early my whole career. So I slowed down. I told Caleb to keep the line open, to keep being the confused, loyal fiancé who was working on his father. Every text she sent him, he sent to me. They were a thing of beauty, those texts, because they cycled between sugar and venom depending on the day. "I love you so much, I can't wait to be your wife." And then, when he stalled, "Your father is going to destroy us, and you're just letting him." I screenshotted everyone. On the 71st hour, right at the edge of my deadline, she texted Caleb something I'll frame someday. "My planner says verbal agreements are completely standard at this level. The contracts come after the deposit." Asking for paperwork first is basically calling me a liar. Do you trust me or your father? She'd built herself a trap where asking for proof was an act of betrayal. It's a beautiful piece of manipulation when you see it cold. It just doesn't work on a man who spent his life knowing that when somebody won't show you the paper is the whole problem. I had Dale draw up a strategy and Priya assemble the financials into something a jury could follow in 5 minutes. And then I did the part I'd been looking forward to. I told the woman, through Caleb, that I was satisfied, that I wanted to move forward, that I'd love to meet the planner and the firm's team in person, all together, and write a check that afternoon if everything checked out. She bit so fast it almost wasn't fun. A meeting got scheduled at the offices of her design firm in a glass building in the Arena District. Her brother would be there with the account paperwork. The planner would present the wedding, and I'd bring my checkbook. I had Sal run the address first. The suite had been vacant for 4 months, listed for lease. No design firm had ever operated out of it. They'd rented it by the day. You can do that now. Conference space by the hour, and they were going to stage it like a real office for exactly as long as it took to walk out with my money. The morning of, I put on the gray suit I used to wear to federal court. It still fit mostly. Caleb came by white as a sheet, still hoping, God love him, that there'd be some explanation, that it was all a misunderstanding and the woman he loved would turn out to be real. I told him there wouldn't be, but that after today he'd at least have the truth, and sometimes the truth is kinder than the hope. Dale rode with us. He had his phone set to record, legal in Ohio with one party's consent, and Caleb's consent was plenty. The suite was a sad little piece of theater. Beige carpet, white walls, not a stick of permanent furniture. They'd set up a rented conference table and a row of chairs and put a printed sign on the glass door. The firm's name in a fancy font, taped on with the corners already curling. My son's fiancée was there in a cream-colored suit and her brother in those cufflinks, and an older woman they introduced as the lead planner, who I'd bet my house was just another player they'd called in for the day. Warren! The woman came at me with both arms out, all warmth. I'm so glad we could finally do this properly. I didn't take the hug. I set my old leather briefcase on the rented table, and I opened it. Before we get to the wedding, I said, I want to talk about the firm. You've asked me to put $200,000 into a design company, so I did what I do for any investment. I pulled the registration. I laid the page down. It was formed 11 days ago. There are no employees, no prior projects, no filings, no clients. There's a name on a website. So I have to ask, what exactly am I capitalizing? The smile held, but it was a held thing now, like a man holding a door against the wind. We're a young firm, she said. We'd been operating under a different entity. We just restructured. All right, I said pleasantly, and I laid down the next page. Let's talk vendors. 19 names on the agreement your brother sent. 8 of them don't exist, not registered anywhere in the state, no tax ID, nothing. The other 11 are real businesses. I called every one of them myself. I looked up. Not a single one has a contract with you. Most have never heard your name. The brother stood up. I think we're done here. This is harassment. Sit down, I said, and there must have been something left in my voice from the old days, because he sat. I'm not finished. I want to tell you all a few names. I laid the photographs down one at a time, slow, like dealing cards. Dud Hartley, Cleveland. 290,000. Vincent Pruitt, Indianapolis. 310. Wade, well, you two left Louisville in such a hurry he never got the chance to finish what he started. I looked at my son's fiancée and I watched the color leave her face in real time. 3 engagements, 3 men with money, 3 weddings that fell apart 2 weeks before the date, 3 piles of cash run through your brother's accounts into companies that don't exist. I spent 28 years following money exactly like yours. You didn't run a con on my son. You ran the same con you've been running for 6 years, and you ran it on the one family that had a federal investigator at the dinner table. It was the planner who broke first. The lead planner grabbed her purse and said she wasn't part of any of this and was out the door before anyone could stop her, which told me everything about how much loyalty there was in that room. My son's fiancée tried one more thing. She turned to Caleb and the tears came right on cue, real-looking tears, and she said his name like a prayer. "Caleb, babe, whatever he's telling you, you know me. You know how I feel about you. Don't let him do this to us." And my boy, I have never been prouder of him than in this moment. My boy looked at the woman he'd planned to marry and he said, very quietly, "I recorded you. 6 months of it. I've got you on tape talking to your brother. I just never let myself listen to all of it. Until last week." The room went dead silent. Because that was the piece they hadn't counted on. While I'd been building a financial case, Caleb had been sitting on something better. He'd asked her, months back, if it'd be okay to record some of their talks. He'd framed it as a little ritual. Said couples should be able to look back on their journey. And she thought it was sweet and said yes. One-party consent. After that, Ohio, forgive an old man, Ohio law let him record everything. And buried in 20-some hours of it was a call where she put me on speaker without knowing it stayed recording, a call to her brother, where she said my son was soft, that the old man thinks he's clever but he'll cave when she cries, and that if it fell apart, they'd cut bait and find someone fresh. Indies burned, maybe go west. And her brother, on that tape, laid out exactly how the vendor invoices got forged and how the deposits were non-refundable by the time anyone catches on. That recording wasn't just embarrassing. That recording was conspiracy to commit wire fraud in their own voices, with an admission of prior frauds. Dale called it, very softly, the whole ball game. Here's what I expected to happen next. I expected them to fold their tents and disappear, slip out of state and try their luck in Kentucky or Tennessee. What I got instead told me just how desperate they become. 3 days after that meeting, my son was served with a lawsuit. My son's fiancée was suing him for breach of promise to marry, demanding $900,000 for emotional distress and lost opportunities. She'd hired a courthouse steps lawyer named Cyrus Bell, the kind that advertises on the side of buses, and the suit was a work of pure fiction. Caleb had wooed her, proposed to her, introduced her to his family, and then cruelly abandoned her under his father's coercive influence. Caleb was rattled. Can she even do that? In a handful of states, technically yes, Dale said. Ohio's one of them. They almost never win. But she's not trying to win. She's trying to muddy the water. Get a court record that says she's the wronged party so that when the fraud charges come, she can wave a piece of paper and cry, "Persecution." He shrugged. It's a smart move from a desperate person. It's also the worst mistake she could make because now we get to answer. And answer we did. Dale filed a response that ran 50-some pages. We attached Priya's forensic breakdown. Every fake vendor, every shell account, the money trail mapped so plainly a child could follow it. We attached sworn affidavits from Doug Hartley and Vincent Pruitt, both of whom had agreed to come forward the second I told them they weren't alone. Wade in Louisville signed, too. He told me on the phone that he'd carry it to his grave that he hadn't stopped her, and that helping put her away would let him finally set it down. And we attached the recordings. We filed a motion to dismiss her suit and a counterclaim for fraud. But the part that mattered most happened quieter. I took Priya's package, the whole index thing, and I sent it to a man named Hank Mercer, a senior investigator with the State Attorney General's Economic Crimes Unit, somebody I'd known back when I was still carrying a badge. I sent a copy to the FBI field office because the money had crossed state lines, which makes it federal wire fraud, which carries real weight. Hank called me 2 days later. "Warren," he said, "I've been chasing a pattern of wedding and investment frauds across 3 states for a year and a half, and I could never quite tie the accounts together. You just handed me the knot." He told me they'd found 2 more possible victims I didn't even have. A man in Mexgunton. 5 victims, maybe more. Total losses by his count north of $1.5 million. The pressure did to my son's fiancée what pressure does to everyone eventually. She started making mistakes. She texted Caleb, and the text went from love to threat in the space of a paragraph. I'll drop the suit if you just talk to me, no lawyers. And then, when he didn't bite, I know people. I can make things very difficult for you and your father. Think hard about how far you want this to go. Dale read that one twice, smiled, and filed for a protective order. That, he said, is witness intimidation, and it's a gift. She made one last gamble. The week before the civil hearing, she posted a long, weepy thing on social media about how her fiancé's cold-hearted father had torn apart the love of her life, how she was a woman fighting for her right to be happy against a controlling old man. It might have worked. It was well written, manipulative in exactly the way that travels, except that the internet is a small town now. Doug Hartley saw it. He commented under it, "Funny, you told me the same story before you vanished with my money." Vincent Pruitt shared it with 3 words, "This is a con." Wade just posted the word fraud over and over until her post came down. The screenshots are still out there. Some things you can't delete. The day of the civil hearing, my son's fiancée sat at the plaintiff's table looking like a Sunday school teacher in a modest suit, dabbing her eyes. Her brother wasn't there. Her lawyer made his case, all violins, the whirlwind romance, the broken-hearted bride. The judge, a sharp woman named Judge Okafor, listened without expression. Then Dale stood up and asked the court's permission to play a recording. I have spent a lot of years in courtrooms, and I have rarely enjoyed 12 minutes more than the 12 it took for that tape to play. The woman's own voice, filling that quiet room, calling my son soft, calling me an old fool who'd cave, laying out the plan to skip to the next city. Her face went through about 4 different people in those 12 minutes. The wronged bride. Then panic. Then a terrible scrambling attempt to look composed while her own words convicted her out loud. Dale laid out the rest like a man stacking bricks. The 11-day-old firm. The 8 phantom vendors. The 5 victims. The pattern across 6 years. When he finished, Judge Okafor turned to Cyrus Bell and asked if his client wished to respond. He stammered something about needing a continuance to review new evidence. The judge cut him off cold. None of it was new, she said. All of it was public record. Basic diligence would have turned it up. Then she dismissed the suit with prejudice, awarded my son his legal costs to the dollar, and referred the entire matter to the prosecutor's office for criminal investigation. As we packed up, I heard my son's former fiancée, very small, say to no one, "What am I supposed to do now?" I didn't answer her. I'd stopped owing her anything the moment she opened that folder. The criminal side moved faster than the civil side ever does, because Hank and the federal folks had been building their own case in parallel, and ours had filled in the gaps. Within a month, a grand jury handed down indictments against both of them. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity. The state's version of racketeering. They were denied bond reduction. The judge agreed they were flight risks, given that fleeing was the one thing they were genuinely good at. I went to the arraignment. I didn't have to, but I'd earned it. The woman who'd sat at my dinner table in a cream silk blouse stood in a county jumpsuit, her hair flat, the polish all worn off her. The brother looked older in custody, the cufflinks long gone. Just a soft, middle-aged man who'd never worked an honest year. They couldn't afford private lawyers anymore. The con runs dry the second the cons stop running. They never went to trial. The evidence was too heavy. Their public defenders did the only smart thing left and negotiated pleas. She took 12 years. He took 14, because Hank's people had turned up a fraud conviction in his past from his 20s he'd kept buried, and the judge wasn't inclined to forgive a man who taught his own sister the trade. The plea came with restitution, joint and several, a hair over $1.5 million owed to all the men they'd hollowed out. They'll be paying that the rest of their lives, which is to say they'll never really pay it, but the number follows them like a shadow, and there's a justice in that too. I sat in the gallery for the allocution. the part where they have to stand up and say out loud in their own words what they did. My son's former fiancée read hers off a paper in a voice with all the air gone out of it. I ran a scheme to defraud multiple men by pretending to plan weddings I never intended to attend. She named them Hartley, Pruitt, the man in Pittsburgh, the man in Lexington, and then my son's name. I worked with my brother to move and hide the money. I'm guilty of these crimes. Flat as a parking lot. No tears that day. The tears were always a tool, and the tool wasn't worth using anymore. When the marshals walked her past the gallery, she found Caleb's face, and then she found mine. I won't pretend I saw remorse, because I didn't. What I saw was the look of a card player who finally sat down across from someone who'd been counting the deck the whole time. I held her eyes until she looked away. Then I put my arm around my son, and we walked out into the daylight. It's been a while now. Caleb's doing better than I've seen him in years. He spent the first few months mad at himself, the way the kind ones always do, turning it over, asking how he could have been so blind. I told him the truth, which is that he wasn't blind. He was lonely. And lonely is the door every one of these people walks through. The difference between him and her other marks was that some quiet, stubborn part of him knew. That's why he saved the recordings before he could even say why. That's why he slipped me a napkin under the table instead of writing me a check. He knew. He just needed his old man to say it out loud. He's seeing somebody new now. A nurse named Maggie he met through a friend from his running club. The first time I had her to dinner, she heard the story. Caleb tells it now. Can you believe that? Tells it at parties. And she laughed and said anybody who demands $800,000 at a pot roast dinner ought to be arrested on principle. She's right. They were. People ask me sometimes, the ones who hear about it, how I knew so fast. And the honest answer is I almost didn't. I'd let myself stop looking because I wanted my boy to be happy more than I wanted to be careful. What saved us wasn't my career. It was that one thing, that two-word thing, that any of you can say at any table where somebody's hand is reaching into your family's pocket. Show me. Real love doesn't flinch at that. Real love never once cares whether you trust it on faith, because it's got nothing to hide and everything to show you. It's only the con that turns your reasonable question into a betrayal. When somebody you love asks for a fortune and gets angry that you'd like to see the paper, the anger is the answer. And here's the other thing I'll leave you with, because the sharp ones always ask it, and they're right to. If a wedding's the dream, where's your family in all this? Why is it always one man, alone, being handed the whole bill at the end of the meal? Because a real wedding is two families finding their way together, awkward and imperfect and shared. A con is just an invoice with a smile on top. Learn to tell the difference, and you'll never hand your life savings to a stranger in a nice handbag. I've got a 1920s mantel clock on my workbench that's been waiting 2 months for me to get back to it. The gears are gummed up, and the case is cracked, and it's going to take me all winter to bring it back. But I've got the winter now, and the house is quiet again in the good way. My son is safe. The people who came for him are exactly where they belong. And me. I learned the same lesson I'd been teaching juries my whole career, except this time it cost me a few gray hairs to learn it personally. You can retire from chasing crooks. The crooks just don't always get the memo. They'll find you at a dinner table on a Sunday, smiling, asking for the salt, and when they do, you smile right back, and you say the 2 words, and you watch the whole thing come apart in their hands. What stays with me, more than the courtroom or the cuffs, is how close I came to handing it all over with a smile. I'd spent 28 years following dirty money, and I almost wrote a check to a stranger in a nice handbag, because I wanted my son happy more than I wanted to be careful. That's the first thing I'd want you to carry out of this. The trouble didn't start when she opened that folder. It started months earlier, when a lonely young man stopped asking hard questions and a careful old man stopped looking. Every con that ever worked because somebody decided not to see. Caleb's softness wasn't a flaw, but it was a door. and she walked right through it. The reason this ended with her in a jumpsuit instead of him in ruin comes down to three things, and none of them were luck. The first is plain decency, the kind that makes you protect your own and refuse to look away when someone's getting hurt right in front of you. I could have stayed comfortable. I could have called Caleb paranoid and kept my quiet retirement. Choosing to act, knowing it might cost me my son's love in the short run, was the part that mattered most. Do right even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. The second is knowing how to think when your gut is screaming. Anger wants you to swing. I'd watched amateurs blow airtight cases by tipping their hand, so I slowed down, gave her 72 hours, let the documents do the convicting. Show me wasn't a threat. It was just the discipline of asking for proof and refusing to be shamed out of it. Anybody can learn that. When somebody you love asks for a fortune and gets furious that you'd like to see the paper, the fury is your answer. Real love has nothing to hide. And the third is the simple grit to finish what you start. Building the case took weeks of late nights, phone calls to men who'd been humiliated and didn't want to relive it. A forensic accountant and a private investigator and the lawyer, all stitched together while she sued my own boy. There were nights I wanted to stop and just pay her to go away. Doug Hartley couldn't finish it. Wade in Louisville couldn't. The difference wasn't smarts. It was that I kept going when it got ugly. Caleb told the story at a dinner party last month and laughed at the end. That's how I know he's free of it. He learned the hardest lesson there is, that the people who flatter you fastest are usually reaching for your pocket, and he learned it young enough to use it. I'm 67 with a cracked old clock on my workbench in a quiet house I've made peace with. If a smiling stranger ever sits at your table and hands you the whole bill, do the decent thing. Keep your head and don't quit before it's done. Say the two words. Then watch.